Hi, everyone. So this is the first module for the Bc32 Short Communications assignment. As you can see, this module is all about citations. Now, there's no submission associated with this module. So really what you need to do here is just sit back and relax and listen to me talk about citations for the next little while. The reason that we start with this module on citations is because for all the other modules that comprise this assignment, there will be submissions associated with them. And as you would likely expect, you're going to be required to include citations within those submissions, with the possible exception of the module that relates to presenting results, because as you likely again already know, it's actually pretty rare that there are citations within the results section of a scientific paper. And that's because in the results section, you are, for the most part, presenting your own findings. So there really is nothing to make reference to. Now, having said that you can sit back and relax and just listen to me talk about citations, I should also emphasize that you do want to pay careful attention to what I'm saying, because you want to make sure that when you are doing the citations for the submissions for the other modules, that you are doing them correctly, okay? And so, again, sit back, relax, and enjoy, but also pay careful attention. Okay, there are basically two fundamental questions that I want to tackle in this module regarding citations. The first of these questions is already here on the screen. Why do researchers cite other studies in their papers? The other question I'm going to tackle a little bit later is, how do researchers cite other studies in their papers? So these are the two aspects of citations that I want to tackle here in this module. So again, starting with the why. Why do we include citations in our work? I'm actually going to give you 4 different answers to that question. And so the first answer to that question is that we include citations in our work as a way to give credibility to the statements that we are making. So I want you to imagine the following scenario. I want you to imagine that you are in a fancy restaurant, like the one pictured here. And I want you to imagine that the waiter comes along and asks you if you would like a glass of ice water, and you say yes. And so again, as pictured here, the waiter begins to pour ice water into your glass. And as he's pouring, he makes the following statement. He says, drinking ice cold water gives some people headaches. Now, what are you going to do with that statement as the diner here in this situation? Well, you could just accept that that statement is true because he said it. And very interestingly, in this kind of social media dominated world that we live in, there are a lot of people who are happy to just accept statements they've read or heard as being true, without requiring any kind of supporting evidence. But hopefully, as a burgeoning scientist here, taking courses at UTSC, you're not going to be such a gullible person. You're not just going to accept that if someone made a statement, it must be true and I'll accept it. So what the diner here should do is basically say to the waiter, well, how do you know that that's true? And let's say the waiter responds to that question in the following way. The waiter says, well, I have a PhD in biology from the University of Toronto. Well, of course, you might follow up with the question, well, then why are you working as a waiter in this restaurant? It's discouraging to think you have a PhD from U of T and can't actually find related employment. But let's put that aside for a moment. The fact that this person told you that they have a PhD in biology from U of T, this is likely going to make you more likely to accept their statement as being true, right? We can refer to this as credentialism, where basically you are going to accept that a statement a person has made is true because they have credentials, in this case, a PhD in biology from a respected university, that are relevant to the statement they are making, right? When you're talking about headaches, that's obviously a very kind of biological concept. And so the fact that this person has biology related credentials would make you more likely to accept the statement as being true. And so this is part of the reason why sometimes if you're watching maybe interviews on television or the radio or YouTube or wherever you happen to be seeing interviews, if you even see interviews at all, or maybe if you're on social media and someone is presenting ideas there. Oftentimes there will be a statement of what are the credentials of this person who's talking. Are they a professor at a university? Are they the president of a foundation or something? And the reason that information is included is because if someone has credentials in a relevant area to the topic at hand, then you're more likely to accept what they're saying as true. Now, the reality is that this savvy diner here might say, okay, well, yes, you have a PhD in biology from U of T, but I actually want more proof in terms of the validity of your statement than just your credentials. And so perhaps the waiter could then hand this diner a copy of the following paper. So this is a 2001 paper from Cephalogia. And you can see just from reading the title here, it says headache caused by drinking cold water is common and related to active migraine. And you could go through obviously and read the paper in more detail, but essentially this paper seems to substantiate and give credibility to the statement this waiter made, that they actually found in this work that when people were drinking ice cold water, in this case I think it says through a straw, they were likely to experience a headache, and that was actually much more common in people who had self-reported that they had a history of migraine. So now, with this paper in hand that this waiter has given you, you can actually see and evaluate for yourself the evidence that supports this claim that this waiter has made. Now, again, you might go through this paper and you might have problems with the way that it carried out its study. And so maybe you're skeptical about their conclusion that cold water causes headaches. That would be fair. That's actually a really important part of science, is going through and scrutinizing work that others have done. One of the points I'll make here perhaps is don't just assume that because this study has been published and therefore has likely undergone a peer review process, don't just accept then the paper as being true as well, right? You still want to always read scientific papers with a great deal of scrutiny, and really you want to be evaluating the evidence for yourself and saying, I'm reading this Cephalogia paper that this waiter gave me, it seems to substantiate the claim that he's made, but I want to make sure for myself that I think the methods are sound. I want to make sure for myself that the conclusion being drawn here is actually supported by the data, right? We live in this era in science where there are a lot of papers getting published that are not being given proper scrutiny through the peer review process. And so I think that means that we as scientists ourselves have to make sure that we don't just look at a paper and say, oh, this is what they say they found, and I'm just going to accept that as being true. We again have to put on our thinking and reasoning caps and really read all scientific papers through a very critical lens. But in any case, if we go through this paper and we say, okay, we're content with the way the methods were carried out, we're content the results substantiate the conclusions about this cold water headache relationship, then we now can accept the statement that this waiter made as being true, and we're good. All right. So that's one reason to cite papers, is to kind of give credibility to the statements you're making in your own paper. Now, I want to continue with this first answer a little bit further. So here we have another scenario. We have a research mentor on the left talking to a young research mentee on the right. And this young mentee is going to make the following statement. She says DNA is comprised of 4 different nitrogenous bases. And how does the research mentor respond to that? He responds by saying, no duh. So this is a very different response than we talked about in the previous scenario. And this is because the statement being made here is a very different statement. So if you go back to the dining room situation, the statement being made about cold water causing headache, that was a statement that, a general biologist would not really know whether that was true or not. So they would need some kind of credibility to substantiate that statement. But here we have a statement being made by this young research mentee that every single biologist would know is true. And therefore, there is no reason to need to give credibility to this statement. That's why the mentor gave this maybe derogatory response, but said, no duh. So one of the things I want to point out here is that if in your scientific writing, you are making statements that you could read in an introductory biology textbook, like this Campbell textbook here, if you're making statements that you could expect to read in an introductory biology textbook, then that means those statements do not need you to give credibility to them. They already are credible on their own because all biologists know them and accept them as being true. So that's an important thing for you to think about when you're writing any scientific paper is, does the statement I'm making need me to give credibility to it or not? Is it a statement that I could find in an introductory biology textbook and that therefore every biologist should know is true, and therefore I don't have to include a reference, I don't need to give any credibility to that statement? Or am I making a statement that is more specialized, that I wouldn't find in a biology introductory textbook, and therefore I should include a reference to it to give it credibility? So you have to kind of go through that process with every statement that you're making in your scientific writing. Does it need credibility, or is it a widely accepted biological idea that does not need me to substantiate it in some way? Now, of course, what is considered to be accepted biological dogma, of course, changes over time. If this whole scenario here with this research mentor and mentee had been playing out in, say, the late 1950s, early 1960s, then this statement that she's making might have actually required some kind of reference to give it credibility because, as you probably already know, the structure of DNA was first reported in 1953 in this famous paper by Watson and Crick. And so if I was writing a scientific paper in, say, 1957, and I had included this statement about DNA being comprised of 4 nitrogenous bases, I would likely have to make reference to this Watson and Crick paper, right? Because this would not be, at that time, established dogma. It would be a relatively new idea that maybe not all biologists were aware of, and therefore I would have to include a reference to give credibility to that statement. So again, as time changes and as ideas become more and more just widely accepted in the biological community, then we shift from needing a reference to give credibility to a statement to perhaps not needing that reference later on. So again, I recognize this can be a bit of a tricky line to figure out. Do I need to cite it? Do I not need to cite it? If you have any question in your mind, then it's always better to include a citation. But this is the guiding principle. If you think you could read that statement in an intro biology textbook, then don't worry about making a reference. Okay, the second answer to this question, why do we cite other studies in our work? We do so to demonstrate to our audience that we know what is already known, and that then helps to set the stage for showing that the research that we are going to do and to talk about in our paper is actually novel. And we'll talk more about this in the next module on, coming up with a research question. But the goal of all scientific research is novelty, right? Generally, any scientific study that's being done is trying to answer a question that has not been previously answered. And so what we want to do is we want to show people that we know what has already been shown to be true in the literature, and then also kind of gradually transition into showing people here is where the gap in knowledge exists, and then this is the particular research question that we're going to ask here in our own work. So just to kind of illustrate this second point about demonstrating what's known and showing novelty, I'm going to do so by showing you some statements in a scientific paper. So this paragraph here starts by telling us what apoptosis is. known as programmed cell death. It's a form of cell death that serves to eliminate dying cells in proliferating or differentiating cell populations. And then you can see there's a reference here. In this case, it's a numerical reference to reference number 10. I might have argued here that that reference isn't needed. I would generally say that apoptosis is probably one of those kind of general biology ideas that probably does not require at this point a citation, but these researchers put one in, so they felt that it did. So that first statement there is basically just defining apoptosis. It goes on to say that it plays a crucial role in normal development and tissue homeostasis. And again, you can see there's a reference there. So the researchers are just trying to show their audience, show their readers that they know what apoptosis is, and they know that it's important for development. The next sentence here says that strenuous exercise influences apoptosis in a variety of tissues, and there are two references given here. I would have preferred perhaps for them to have mentioned the specific tissues, but they didn't choose to do that. But I assume that there are two references here, so there are probably at least two different tissues in which this relationship between exercise and apoptosis has been shown. They also don't really tell us the nature of that relationship. They don't tell us whether exercise, promotes or suppresses apoptosis. So again, I think, I chose this example because it does a good job of kind of showing what's already known and working us to the novelty, but it's not exactly the best in terms of the actual English writing. But again, they're trying to use these two references, numbers 4 and number 8 here, to show us that, we know that strenuous exercise influences apoptosis, okay, in lots of tissues. We know that that is known. We're showing you that. And then they go on to say that there are few studies on the effects of exercise on apoptosis in the brain. And then they go on to say easy and moderate exercises do not alter apoptosis in the brain of adult rats. And there's another reference. So apparently there's a relationship between exercise and apoptosis in a lot of tissues, but there isn't that relationship in the adult brain. Okay. So again, this whole paragraph is really about telling us here's what apoptosis is, and here's what we know about the relationship between apoptosis and exercise in different tissues. Okay. Now the next paragraph takes things a little bit further. It starts by saying that brain development begins in the intrauterine period and continues until the end of adolescence. And again, there's a reference here to give credibility to that statement. And then it goes on to say it has been reported that neurogenesis also takes place in certain regions of the adult brain, adult rat brain. And there are actually 3 references given here. So that's telling us, hey, look, there's lots of work that's been done on that particular point, that there's still new neurons that can be created within some regions of adult rat brains. And then it goes on to say that developing brain is much more sensitive to environmental exposure. And there's a reference there again showing us that we know that this is the case. So when I look at this in totality, I think it's pretty clear, although they haven't stated it here. I think I've kept that part out, but you can kind of get a sense of where this research is going, right? The study that they likely did in this paper was probably about the relationship between exercise and apoptosis, either specifically in these regions of the adult rat brain that do neurogenesis, or perhaps in younger developing rats, rat pups or whatever, because they're really setting the stage for us and saying, hey, we know exercise has an influence on apoptosis in lots of tissues, but it doesn't seem to have that impact in the adult rat brain. But we also know that there are certain adult rat brain regions that are still kind of doing neurogenesis. And we know that neurogenesis and brain development is happening from that intrauterine period all the way through adolescence. And we know that when the brain is developing, it's more sensitive to environmental exposure, such as perhaps exercise. So by showing us what they know is true from the literature, which is what a lot of these references are doing, these researchers are really setting the stage to saying, here's why we're going to do this work that we're going to do. We're going to do a study about exercise and apoptosis, either in like rat pups or young rats, or looking specifically at these still developing regions of the adult rat brain. They're really setting the stage for us here, right? And so this is another reason that we cite papers in our work is to show our audience that this is what is known. And then that sets the stage to say, here's what is unknown. Here's the research question we are tackling in our paper. And we've kind of shown to you that this is a novel and important question that we are tackling. So that's another reason to do citations, okay, is for that purpose. Okay, the third answer to the question, why do we cite papers in our work, is to illustrate whether the research being done supports or contradicts previous research. So let me talk about this in the context of this specific paper here. So here's a paper that was published in 2007 in Functional Ecology. And again, just reading the title here, it says, increased mite parasitism as a cost of testosterone in male striped plateau lizards. So just reading that, I take that the major conclusion here from this paper is that male lizards are more susceptible to parasitism by mites, and this is either directly or indirectly related to how they have higher testosterone levels. Okay, and I'm making that assumption just based off of the title here. It's a very descriptive title, so it's a great title in that regard. And so I can pretty much figure out that that's probably the main finding of this paper. Now, Functional Ecology does something really interesting on its website when you are searching for papers. If you glance over to the right-hand side here, you see this gray box, and it says citation statements within it, and tells you that the citation statements are powered by Cite. It says that at the bottom. So Cite is actually this really interesting website that does a lot of things, but among the things it does is it does citation analysis. And so what you see here is it basically says supporting, mentioning, contrasting. So what Cite does is it looks at all the other papers that have cited this 2007 paper I was talking about here, this one by Cox and John Alder. It's going to look for all the papers that came after this one that cited this 2007 paper, and it's going to analyze whether those later papers, did they support the findings of this 2007 paper? Did they just mention without showing any support? Or did they show contrasting results? And you can see here that there are 7 papers that showed supporting results, and there are 0 papers that showed contrasting results. And so seeing that, you're probably going to say to yourself, okay, well, this paper here then from Functional Ecology about this increased mite parasitism and its relationship to testosterone in male lizards, you're going to feel really good about the likely fact that that whole idea is true, because 7 other papers that came after it seem to show findings that supported that finding, and none were contrasting. Okay. So again, this is, the point I'm trying to make here, I guess, is that the reason for any of these papers that came after this 2007 one, one of the reasons that you might have cited this 2007 paper was just to show the relationship between the work that you had done and this work that had come before. And in this case, for the most part, you were going to show that, hey, what we found broadly supports the work that had been done before. Now, interestingly, I was going through these 7 supporting papers, and one of these papers was actually a 2010 study. It had been done in a different lizard species, so not the striped plateau lizard, but some different lizard species. And while they did find that testosterone attracted some mites to the males and therefore caused increased parasitism, and that's probably why they've listed this as a supporting, that 2010 study was listed as a supporting finding for the 2007 paper. In that 2010 study, they actually did find that there were some mites that were actually repelled by higher levels of testosterone. And so I would consider that part of the finding to be contrasting. So maybe it should be more like supporting 6.5 and contrasting 0.5. I don't think they actually split papers like that. But if you think about the authors of that 2010 study now, right, and why would they have cited this 2007 paper? They probably did so to show that there's actually a bit more complexity to this relationship between testosterone and mite parasitism in lizards than that 2007 study would suggest, right? Again, the 2007 study suggests that, there's always increased mite parasitism in males because of testosterone, but this 2010 study now shows us, well, actually, the situation could be a bit more complex because we found in a different lizard species, okay, we found that some mites were attracted by testosterone and others were repelled. So I think, again, if you're the authors of that 2010 study, the reason you're citing this 2007 study is to basically show that our work does support some of the previous work that's been done, but adds this additional complexity and wrinkle to our understanding. Okay. And so this is a third reason why we might do citations within our studies, right? Is to show how the work we're doing and the findings we're getting, how do they relate to previous work? And this helps us to better understand, kind of the trajectory of this research. Okay. And so maybe if I'm a person who's in this field, I might be thinking to myself, oh, is this kind of specific to the lizard species that we're studying? Is it specific to the kinds of mites we are studying? You can think of how you could perhaps branch out this field of research now to try and really get a better overall kind of grasp and handle on this relationship between lizards and testosterone and mite parasitism. Okay. All right. The fourth and final reason for why we would cite papers in our work is to contribute to the status of a published study, thereby legitimizing ideas and researchers. So the way I'm going to talk about this is actually talking about myself. So if you were to go to Web of Science, which you have access to through the UTSC library website, and if you were to do a search for Brown JCL, so a search for me as an author, this is what would come up, okay? And you can see that there were 19 results. So I've published 19 papers over my career in science. The one that's being shown here is the most recent one. So this was a paper that I published, as you can see, back in 2002. It was actually a collection of data from a bunch of BioD98 projects that I kind of put into a single paper, and we managed to get it published in Biologia. So that's fantastic. But if you were to go over to where it says citation report up here, and if you were to click on that button, then what it would show you is kind of a citation report for me as an author. And so again, it shows you that I have 19 total publications in my career. Over here, it shows you, if I can get over here, it shows you how many times my papers have been cited. So not including self-citations, which is where I cited myself in my own work, 572 people, 572 other papers have cited the other 19 papers that I've done. And so that's an average of 31.84 times that my papers have been cited. And then over on the right-hand side, it calculates something called an H index. And if you were to click on that little info button next to H index, it would basically tell you that what the H index is it's basically a metric of my my status really as a researcher. Okay, so it says here an index of H means that there are H papers that have each been cited at least H times. So because my H index is 15, that means I have 15 papers that have been cited at least 15 times. Okay, and so what the H index is really trying to do is figure out how many papers am I publishing, but also are the papers I'm publishing actually getting cited, right? Are they actually impactful papers that other researchers are citing for some reason? Okay, and so we come to the realization that to be an impactful researcher is not just about publishing a whole bunch of papers, but it's also publishing papers that other researchers are citing, thereby contributing to my status as a researcher, legitimizing my ideas and my status as a researcher. So this is another reason why you might cite a paper, is that you want to show to people that we believe in the ideas that this paper is about, and by extension, we believe in the researcher who is behind, or the researchers who are behind this work, okay? So that's important. Science is not just about publishing, but it's also about having your work cited. That's how you build status as a researcher. Now you might be saying to yourself, okay, Jason, you've got an H-index of 15. Is that a good H-index? Is that a bad H-index? Are you an impactful, influential researcher or not? Here I have a figure from a recent paper showing the relationship between H-index and scientific age. So your scientific age is basically calculated from you're born as a scientist when you publish your first paper. That's the idea. Okay. So your scientific age is your age relative to when you published your first paper. So my first paper was published in 2005. It was some work based on some work I did as an undergrad summer research student. And so I'm recording this video right now in 2024. So subtract from that 2005, my scientific age is 19. And so just looking at the data here, my H-index, given that I'm male, should be above 20. And so obviously the fact that my H-index is only 15, that means that I am a less influential researcher than the average male, okay, given my scientific age. Now, I would say, of course, the reason for that is because my position here at UTSC is a teaching-focused position. So I spend most of my time teaching courses like Bc32. I don't spend as much time conducting research as my research-focused colleagues do. So I would say that's the reason that my H-index is lower, because I'm really more focused on teaching and not as focused on research. But regardless, with an H-index of 15 at my scientific age, I am definitely a less than impactful researcher compared to the average. So the reality is, if more researchers would cite my work, and of course, if I were also to publish more, then I could get that H-index value to increase, and that would increase my status as a researcher. Okay, so this is important to think about, right? Anytime that you are citing a paper, you are contributing to the status of that paper and to the researchers who did that work. That's an important thing to think about. And so kind of going hand in hand with that, I think, is this golden rule of citations, which is never cite a paper you haven't read, right? Because if by citing a paper, you are contributing to its status, if by citing a paper, you are legitimizing the ideas in that paper and legitimizing the researchers who did that work, you don't want to be contributing to the status of a paper and its researchers if the content of that paper is actually garbage, right? So I know a lot of students will do this. They'll kind of quickly read through an abstract and say, yeah, I think this is good enough. It kind of touches on what I was looking for a reference related to this, and this seems to be the close enough. I'll just kind of cite it without having read it. That's a bad habit to get into. Okay, you really should make sure that you have carefully read a paper before you include it as a citation in your own work, right? Because the more that you kind of just cite papers without having read them, the more likely that practice is to come around and bite you in the ass at some point when a paper gets retracted because it was garbage or something, and you're like, oh, I cited that paper in my work. I should have been able to figure out from a careful reading that it wasn't a good paper. So again, this is the golden rule of citations. Never cite a paper you haven't read, because every time you cite a paper, you are giving that paper more status. So you don't want to be giving status to a paper that you actually haven't read. It would be akin to, say, in politics, giving an endorsement to someone saying, yeah, I'd be proud if this person were the mayor of Toronto, without even knowing this person or knowing anything about their background or the ideas that they stand for. And then it later turns out, oh, this person I endorsed for mayor actually is like a huge fan of, this deplorable thing that I would never want my name associated with. So do your due diligence. Read papers that you are going to cite. Don't cite papers you haven't read. The other point I'll make here with regard to citation and status, the University of Toronto, like so many universities now across Canada and North America, is very much committed to EDI, which stands for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusivity. And you can see here, in fact, the Research and Innovation Office at the University of Toronto was especially committed to EDI. So one small point I wanted to mention here in this regard is that when we think about EDI in a research context, what we're thinking about really is how do we elevate the status of researchers who have perhaps been very historically overlooked. And so just looking at the picture that they show here, female scientists and scientists of color have historically been overlooked. Their status has not been as high historically as that of, say, the white male scientists. And so one very simple way that we all can rectify this situation is to cite within our own work papers where the authors, especially the lead author, so the first author on the list, or the anchor author, the last author on the list, if we cite papers where either or both of those authors are women or people of color, we do a good job of helping to elevate the status of those researchers and their work. So think about that too when you're doing citations. Think about, hey, is it possible that I could cite a paper here? And again, make sure you've read it and you're happy with the work. But if there's an opportunity to cite papers that include female researchers or researchers of color, then do so. Because again, through our citations, we are able to elevate the status of those researchers, right? It's the currency of scientific research is citations. That's really the point I'm trying to make here for this fourth answer to this question. And so, again, you're going to say to yourself, well, in the context of a short communication, it doesn't matter because no one's ever going to see that I cited them. I get that. But if you are doing any kind of scientific writing that's going to get published somewhere, then always think about how could I incorporate citations for female researchers or researchers of color, because this is the simplest and most effective way that I could help to boost their status within the research community. Okay, so that kind of ends this part about why do researchers cite other studies in their paper. I want to move on now. Oh, sorry, I guess it doesn't, because the last point I wanted to make here was that every citation in your short communication, okay, so when you're doing submissions for the remaining modules, every citation that you are including in your short communication assignment should be clearly related to one or more of the preceding four reasons I've given. Okay, and if it doesn't, then you should strongly question why you're putting that citation in. So this is one of the things I'm really trying to get you to think about through this module, is whenever you put a citation into any scientific writing you're doing, ask yourself, why am I putting that citation here? I've given you four reasons why we do citations in scientific writing. If you're including a citation, ask yourself, which of those four reasons is the justification for me to include this citation? And if I can't seem to make a relationship to any of these four reasons for citing, then I really should think about, why am I putting this citation here? Is it actually needed? Okay. So now we can move on to the second half of this module, which is to answer this other question about citations, which is how do researchers cite other studies? And again, I think you're going to be fairly familiar with this question. You've been probably putting references into your work since you were in high school, for example. So I'm not going to dwell too long here. But the first thing I wanted to mention with regard to how is to say that there are two ways that we include citations in our work. The first, of course, is in-text citations. Okay, and as the name would suggest, these are citations that are embedded within the written document itself, right? Embedded within the text of the document. And so you can see a couple of examples are given here in this paragraph. So you can see where they've incorporated Lu 2002. excuse me, you can see where they've included a reference to Liu 2002 and later a reference to Riley 2004. And these are embedded right in the text of the document. So that's an in-text citation. Okay. And so the purpose of in-text citations is, again, to they kind of relate back to the 4 reasons I was just talking about. Okay. You're either trying to give credibility to a statement, or you're trying to legitimize work, or whatever. You're trying to do one of those 4 things. And so if we look at the Riley reference here as an example, right, they make this statement that Hong Kong cinema in martial arts films, which has undergone a number of changes in style and content over the past 40 years, ranging from straightforward action to kung fu horror, they give a reference to Riley here. So basically, I would presume that if I was to go to that Riley 2004 reference, I would find some evidence there to support this statement, right? That there's been changes in the way that Hong Kong cinema and martial arts films, they've changed over the past 40 years. I would see evidence in that Riley paper to that effect. So we have in-text citations, which are embedded right into the text. And then also we have a reference list. So at the end of the work, you'll have a reference list, right? Where you'll give now the full details of all the references. So if we go back to the in-text citation, you'll notice in the in-text citation, very minimal information is provided. We've got the author's last name, so whether that's Liu or Riley, and we've got the year of publication, okay? Now, if you had 2 authors on the paper, let's say it was Riley and Brown and me who did the work, it would say Riley and Brown 2004. And of course, if you had more than 3 authors on the work, it would say Riley et al. 2004. Et al. Literally translates from Latin to mean and others. So we are giving very minimal information in the in-text citation. Author's last name, year of publication. But then, of course, in the reference list, this is where we provide the full information that one would need to actually locate that reference. So if you look at the reference list, you can see I have the author's last name, I have the year of publication, just like I did in the in-text citation, but now I have the title of the paper, now I have the journal that the paper was published in, I have the volume, and I have the page numbers as well. So now I have all the information that I would need in order to actually locate that paper so I could read it if I wanted to, and actually scrutinize that paper and see whether it does in fact support this statement that these researchers have made. Okay. So again, we have in-text citations, which are just giving the author's last name and the year, just minimal information embedded right into the text. And then we have the reference list that's giving the full information. I want to just dwell on the reference list for a little bit more here. Because we're now in this very fully digital age for scientific papers, gone are the days like I experienced when I was an undergrad. I remember when I was in second year, I had to do an essay about some aspect of plants. And I literally had to go to the library and spend the day there pulling books off shelves, right? Specific journals, specific volumes, finding the page, putting it down on the photocopier, making copies. Like I spent the whole day in there doing this. We are no longer in that world, right? 99% of all journals now are published digitally. So there's no reason to go pull these volumes off the shelves. But because of that, a lot of journals have changed the way that they organize themselves. They're not organizing themselves necessarily into volumes with pages anymore. Sometimes they are just going to give you what's called a DOI, or a digital object identifier. And so I just wanted to point that out too, that in your reference list, if you encounter such papers, you would basically put the DOI in to your reference in place of the volume and page number. Now, some journals still have volumes and page numbers, plus they have DOIs, and you can include both of those things in your reference list. But just be aware that there are a lot of journals that are shifting to a volumeless and pageless format. And in that case, you may have just the DOI to include into your reference list. Okay, going back to in-text citations for just a moment. If you look at the right-hand side of this document here, it talks about two different kinds of in-text citations. So the one that you'll be doing 99.99% of time, especially in scientific writing, is the paraphrase and summary, okay? Where you are, as it says, expressing an idea from a published work, but expressing it in your own words. You're paraphrasing or summarizing what they've said. And so that's what's happening here with this Riley reference, right? The researchers who wrote this sentence are just sort of paraphrasing or summarizing what Riley said in their work. And then again, putting the reference at the end of the statement so that the reader can know where this idea is coming from. And again, if they want more information or they want to assess the credibility or whatever they want to do, they can go to the reference list, find that Riley paper, and read it. So again, 99.9% of times when we are doing scientific writing, we're going to paraphrase and summarize the ideas from other papers. It does also mention direct quotations, where you put the exact idea that you've copied word for word from another reference in quotations in your own work. And then in this case, they show a page number citation as well, which is very common in that case. I would say that it is incredibly, incredibly rare that scientists use direct quotations in their work. Okay. The only time you would really use direct quotations in science writing is where you feel that the author of the paper that you're citing has said something so profound, in such a way that there's just no way you could kind of paraphrase or summarize it without losing its meaning. Then you might consider direct quotation. But again, in science, this is incredibly rare. Okay. I would say that if you go back to those 19 publications that I've written, maybe once, twice maximum, I've ever had a citation, a direct quotation, and it might have been once within each of those papers. So it's very rare. Okay. So I would suggest that, again, you always focus on trying to paraphrase and summarize the work of other researchers in your own writing, and that you reserve direct quotation for those very rare occasions where a researcher or an author has said something so profound that you just feel like, I have to include that as a direct quote. I can't possibly paraphrase or summarize it without losing its core meaning. But if you find yourself doing direct quotations frequently, then that's a problem. In science, we just do not use direct quotations very commonly. Okay. Okay, next up here, I wanted to just show you kind of another format you could use for doing both in-text citations as well as a reference list. So here you can see that they are using numbers for their in-text citations as opposed to using author's last name and year. And so this is a perfectly acceptable format for in-text citations. You could do this in your short communication assignment if that's what you want to do. There are pros and cons, I think, to using this number system. The biggest pro in my mind is that it definitely does not disrupt the flow of reading. When you're reading this paragraph here, the numbers that they're using as the references, they don't interrupt the reading flow, right? They're numbers, so they generally kind of stand out from the words that are otherwise here. They don't take up much physical space, so it's very easy to kind of just get past them and keep reading. When you use the other format with last name and year, it's a bit more disruptive, right? Because it can be a bit harder to kind of quickly distinguish the text from these last names of the authors. And especially if you have multiple authors or multiple papers that you're citing, it can be a lengthy in-text citation. And so it kind of makes it hard to figure out where does the next idea start and kind of get from one idea to the next as you're reading the paragraph. So that's the major pro, I think, of the numerical system, is that it doesn't interrupt the flow of reading as much. But the major con of this system is that you have to then go to the reference list to figure out what reference is here, right? I mean, 13, 14, 15 in this paragraph, I have no idea what those references are without going to the reference list. Whereas if it's author, last name, year, I might be reading this statement and it says, oh, Riley and Brown 2004. And if this is a field that I'm very intimately familiar with, I might already know, oh, I know that Riley and Brown paper from 2004. And so I don't have to go to the reference list. I know that paper. So there are pros and cons to both formats. And so you see both used in scientific journals, and you can use whichever you prefer here for your short communication assignments. What I'll note about the reference list when you're doing numbering is your reference list then is organized numerically. If you are doing the last name and year style of in-text citation, then your reference list is going to be organized alphabetically by the author's last name. So just keep that in mind. How you organize your reference list is different depending on the system that you're using. I will also point out, and this is important, that when you are using the numerical system, the references are always going to, like the first reference that you have in your paper will be number 1, right? Then the next one is number 2, and then number 3, and so forth, okay? So if this were the first paragraph of this paper, it shouldn't be 13, 14, and 15 that I'm seeing here. It'd be 1, 2, and 3, okay? We always present the in-text citations kind of in numerical order throughout our paper if we're doing this numbering system. Okay, one last slide here, and I'll wrap this up. Just a couple of small things about in-text citations that I wanted to talk more about. The first is when you are citing multiple works to support a statement that you're making. So in this particular example, they say several studies have demonstrated the importance of this matter. And so you can see that they have put in parentheses several studies, right? This Franklin and Combs study, this Michigan State University study, this Miller study, this, study finds. So that they're doing some very unconventional citation stuff here. But you can see that they are showing us within this one parentheses 4 different studies that show the importance of this matter, whatever this matter happens to be. So again, you might be doing this in your own work. You might say something like, several studies have shown that vitamin D supplementation increases testosterone levels in males. And then in parentheses, you might have 3 or 4 studies that have shown that. A couple of things to mention here about this. One is that when you are putting all these studies into the same parentheses, because they're all related to each other, you're either going to put them in alphabetical order, which is what they've done here, right? Franklin, then Michigan, then Miller, then study finds, or you put them in chronological order. Okay, you have those 2 options, but again, just be consistent, right? It doesn't matter which of these formats you use, especially for your short communications, but be consistent. And the other thing I'll point out here is you'll notice how they start their parentheses here with E.G. right? Which means, for example. And so what they're telling us here is we're not citing every single study that has shown that this matter is important. We're showing you some examples, right? So we can't always, there could be 20 studies that show the importance of this matter. We don't necessarily want to reference all 20 of them, right? So they give 4 references here, and they use that E.G. comma, for example, to say, these are examples of references that are out there. There could be more, but these are examples. And so this is an opportunity, again, when you think about, which of maybe there are 20 citations that show the importance of this matter. Which 3 or 4 am I going to include here? Again, I might go back to that EDI idea from earlier and say, okay, well, if I have choices in terms of who I'm going to cite, maybe I'll cite papers especially that will help to elevate the status of female and or BIPOC scientists, for example. Okay, next they talk here about citing multiple works by the same author. So in this case, they give the example of a number of guidelines address this issue. And all the guidelines that they are going to cite are from the American Psychological Association. So there was a 2003 paper, a 2005 paper, a 2006 paper. And rather than listing the same author, in this case, the APA, over and over and over again for each of those citations, they just list the author once, and then they put all the different years for the different publications. So this could happen in your work too. You could have, maybe there are 2 Riley and Brown studies that support your statement. And so you would just say Riley and Brown 2004, 2008, for example, okay? You don't have to restate the author again if it's within the same parentheses. And then lastly, and this is perhaps the most important one of these three, is citing a source multiple times. So here's a paragraph at the bottom that you read, and you can see where this Kessler 2003 paper has been cited 3 times within this paragraph. I find that a lot of times when students are writing, they think, oh, I'm just going to write this whole paragraph, and then at the end, I'll cite Kessler 2003. And that always leaves a lot of ambiguity to the reader because, they don't know, is this whole paragraph coming from Kessler 2003 or just the last sentence? You don't want your reader to have ambiguity, right, with respect to references. So as they kind of do here, it's actually preferable to cite the same citation over and over and over again within a paragraph of text to make it clear that each one of these sentences that are in this paragraph, I'm paraphrasing them from this Kessler paper, okay? That removes any ambiguity. I know sometimes students will say, or you'll feel like, oh, this is redundant. Like I just keep hitting the same reference over and over again, but it's a way of ensuring that it's very clear to your reader that all these ideas that you're talking about here are you paraphrasing from the Kessler 2003 paper. You don't want to leave your reader guessing where these statements are coming from, okay? So that's the last important point I wanted to mention. Okay, so that's all I have to say about citations. Hopefully you found this helpful. And hopefully then as you roll on to Module 2, and you actually have a submission associated with that module, and you're actually going to have to include citations within your submission, hopefully you now have a bit of food for thought in terms of why am I doing citations? How do I do citations? And hopefully this will extend beyond just Bio C32 in this project, but extend to any other scientific writing that you are doing. So I will stop talking now, and I will see you in the next module. Take care for now.